in the stillness of winter's longest night, where snow whispers secrets to the trees and the moonlight weaves tales of old, a story unfolds deep within Frostvile Forest. Close your eyes and let the gentle rustle of wind carry you to a place of ancient magic, where a lone knight seeks a rose that can reveal the truth of his soul. As the forest dreams, let its quiet echoes guide you into a peaceful slumber, where the world fades and wonder begins. The wind whispered through the frozen pines, carrying with it an ancient tale that few dared to believe. In the heart of Frostvile Forest, where even sunlight cowered beneath the iron-grey skies, there grew a single rose, a bloom so rare it was said to possess the power to unravel the threads of fate. This was no ordinary rose. Its petals shimmered like spun silver, and it blossomed only on the longest night of winter. Legends claim the winter rose was a gift from the moon itself, guarded by a being as old as the forest. An owl with eyes that glimmered like starlight and feathers etched with frost. Alaric first heard the tale in a shadowed tavern at the edge of the Frostvile. The fire crackled low in the hearth as a grizzled storyteller spun his yarn, his voice weaving through the smoky air like a spell. "The winter rose," he murmured, leaning closer to his entranced audience, "reveals what lies hidden in your soul. Your future, your truth. But beware, for the owl that guards it does not suffer the unworthy. Many have sought the rose, few have returned, and those who do, they are never the same." The knight sat apart, a hood casting his weathered face in shadow. His hands rested heavily on the hilt of his sword, his mind turning over the tale like an old coin. Alaric was a wanderer now, a knight unmoored from his purpose. War had stripped him of his homeland, his comrades and his pride, leaving him with little more than the armor on his back and a nagging emptiness in his chest. Could this rose, this miraculous flower, hold the answer he sought? Or was it merely a fool's errand, a pretty lie told to fill the silence of long winter nights? As the tavern grew quieter and the crowd dispersed, Alaric approached the storyteller. "This rose," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Have you seen it?" The man looked up, his milky eyes unfocused, but his smile was sharp. "I've seen enough to know it's real. The owl, too. A word of warning, knight. The forest doesn't give back what it takes. If you go looking for the rose, be prepared to leave something behind." Alaric left before dawn, his breath misting in the icy air. The forest loomed ahead, its dark silhouette a jagged line against the pale sky. The tales he'd heard as a child about Frostvile Forest came rushing back. Trees that whispered secrets, shadows that moved when you weren't looking, paths that led you in circles until you lost all sense of time. But it wasn't the forest that truly frightened him. It was the uncertainty of what he might find, or worse, what he might not. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the threshold into Frostvale. The air grew colder, heavy with a silence that pressed against his ears. The trees stretched endlessly, their branches tangled like skeletal fingers, and the light took on an otherworldly quality, muted and faint. Alaric tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, though he doubted steel would be of much use against whatever lay ahead. As he ventured deeper, the wind carried faint echoes, laughter perhaps, or the howl of wolves. He couldn't be certain. The deeper he went, the less the forest felt like a place, and more like a living thing, watching, waiting. The legends spoke of trials, and Alaric could feel them lurking just beyond the edge of his perception, sharpening like teeth in the shadows. The winter rose was no ordinary prize. If the tales were true, it had the power to lay bare the future, to peel away the layers of uncertainty and doubt. For Alaric, the prospect was both intoxicating and terrifying. What if the truth it revealed was more burden than blessing? What if it confirmed the gnawing suspicion that his destiny was empty, a path leading nowhere? The sun dipped low, its light swallowed by the forest's greedy shadows. Alaric pressed on, his breath ragged, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Somewhere ahead, beneath the solstice moon, the winter rose waited, and with it, the owl, its silver eyes gleaming in the dark, its riddles coiled like a serpent's hiss. He could feel it now, a pull deep in his chest, as if the forest itself had caught hold of his soul and was drawing him closer to its heart. The wind whispered again, softer this time, almost gentle. Alaric. He froze. The sound was not the forest. It was a voice, familiar yet strange, and it spoke his name like a promise and a curse. The knight gritted his teeth and stepped forward into the deepening shadows, his breath clouding the air. Whatever lay ahead, there would be no turning back. The air in the Frostvale forest grew heavier, as if the very trees were conspiring to smother any trace of warmth. Alaric pressed forward, his breath fogging the frigid air, each step muffled by a carpet of snow that seemed to absorb sound. There was no path, only the faint glimmers of moonlight seeping through the tangled canopy, guiding him deeper into the forest's labyrinthine heart. Every branch and shadow appeared to twist and reach, alive with intent. It began subtly, the first of the trials, like an unspoken question hanging in the frozen stillness. Alaric came upon a river, its surface sheathed in ice, glittering with a crystalline beauty that belied its treachery. The far bank seemed impossibly distant, shrouded in mist, but a thin bridge of ice spanned the water's breadth. Alaric approached cautiously, his boots crunching through the snow. The bridge was narrow, glinting like a blade in the moonlight. As he stepped closer, the wind howled, and a voice carried through the icy gale. It was his own voice, echoing from across the chasm, filled with doubt. "Why do you press on, knight?" Do you truly believe the rose will heal what is broken within you? Alaric's heart clenched at the words, though he refused to falter. He set his boot upon the bridge, the ice groaning beneath his weight. The voice grew louder, sharper. What if the truth you seek only deepens the void? What if there is nothing waiting for you but emptiness? He gritted his teeth and strode forward, the bridge quivering beneath each step. Halfway across, the ice splintered, sharp cracks racing outward like lightning. Panic surged through him, but his grip on his sword's hilt tightened, the cold steel grounding him. He would not turn back. With a final leap, he landed on the far bank, his breath ragged and the echoes silenced. The bridge behind him crumbled into shards, swallowed by the icy depths. The forest, it seemed, was testing his resolve. Further in, the silence became oppressive, broken only by the faint crunch of snow beneath his boots. The trees appeared closer now, their gnarled branches forming twisted arches overhead. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, black wolves with eyes like molten amber. They stalked him silently, their forms flickering between solidity and mist. When Alaric turned to confront them, they dissipated, only to reform further ahead, herding him like prey. Then one lunged. It was swift as a blade, its form a blur of shadow and frost. Alaric raised his sword instinctively, the clash reverberating in the air. But instead of flesh, his blade met nothingness. The wolf dissolved into smoke, its form curling around him, cold and suffocating. A voice slithered from the mist, soft as a sigh. Do you fear the unknown night? Alaric gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on his sword. Fear is the companion of the untested, he muttered, stepping forward into the swirling shadows. The mist parted, and the wolves retreated, their eyes glowing like dying embers before they vanished into the trees. The third trial came without warning. The snow beneath his feet turned to glass, reflecting a pale, distorted version of himself. Alaric paused, his reflection staring back with eyes hollow and accusing. The forest around him warped, becoming a hazy, shifting dreamscape. His reflection moved of its own accord, its lips parting to speak Dot. You wear the armor of a knight, but it is a hollow shell. Who are you beneath it, Alaric? A soldier abandoned by war? A man seeking redemption for sins he cannot name? Alaric's chest tightened, but he did not look away. I am a man searching for meaning, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil roiling within him. Even if it is buried beneath ice and shadow. The reflection twisted, its expression softening, almost approving, before shattering into countless shards. The forest reasserted itself, the dreamlike haze dissipating. Alaric stood alone once more, his breath fogging in the cold air dot. The path ahead seemed clearer now, the oppressive weight of the forest momentarily lifting. The trials had not broken him, but he could feel the forest's intent, testing not his strength, but the core of his being. As the trees parted to reveal a pale, moonlit clearing, Alaric felt the pull grow stronger, like a thread tightening around his heart somewhere ahead. The owl waited, its silver eyes gleaming in the shadows. But Frostvile was not finished with him yet. The clearing was a still, unnatural void in the heart of the forest. The trees at its edge loomed like sentinels, their branches laced together to form an impenetrable crown. At the center stood an ancient tree, its bark blackened with age, its limbs stretching skyward as though yearning for the cold light of the moon. Cradled within the gnarled embrace of its roots was the winter rose. Its petals glimmered faintly, as if a fragment of the night sky had been caught and woven into its delicate form. Alaric froze at the sight, his breath catching in his chest. The tales had not done it justice. The rose seemed alive, pulsing faintly with a light that was neither fire nor star, but something altogether otherworldly. Yet it was not the rose that sent a shiver down his spine, but the presence that loomed above it. The owl emerged from the shadows with a soundless grace, its feathers gleaming like frost-kissed metal. Its eyes were twin orbs of liquid silver, swirling with an unfathomable depth. When it looked at him, it felt as though it saw through the layers of his being, down to the bare, trembling truth of who he was. "Night," the owl said, its voice like the rustle of leaves on a windless night. "You have come far." Alaric tightened his grip on his sword, though he knew it would be of no use. The owl's presence radiated an ancient power, primal and untouchable. "I've come for the rose," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the owl's gaze. The creature tilted its head, its silver eyes glinting with something between amusement and pity. "And what do you hope to find in its bloom? Salvation, clarity, the truth of your soul?" Alaric hesitated. The forest had forced him to confront his doubts, but the answer still eluded him. I need to know if there is more to my existence than wandering aimlessly through a broken world, if I have a purpose." The owl spread its wings, and the air grew colder, as if the very moonlight had turned to frost. The winter rose reveals much, but it does not give lightly. To touch its petals is to lay bare the truths you hide from yourself, the truths you fear. Are you prepared to face them? Alaric's heart thundered in his chest. The trials had pushed him to the edge of his resolve, yet the thought of turning back filled him with a hollowness greater than any fear. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. "I am." The owl's eyes narrowed, and it regarded him in silence for a long moment. Then it spoke, its tone sharp and deliberate. "Prove it." The ground beneath Alaric trembled, and the clearing transformed. The ancient tree faded, replaced by a vast, empty expanse of mirrored ice. The sky above darkened, the moon and stars swallowed by shadow. Alaric's reflection appeared on the glassy surface, but it was not his own. The figure was a younger version of himself, armor polished, eyes bright with hope and determination. It looked at him with disdain, its voice cutting through the silence. Is this what you've become? A shadow of the knight you once were? You carry a sword, but you've forgotten why you wield it. Alaric felt the sting of the words, but he refused to look away. I haven't forgotten. I've been searching for a reason to keep wielding it. The reflection sneered. And you think the rose will give you that reason? Fool! The truth is, you fear what the rose will show you. You fear that there is no grand purpose waiting for you, that you are as empty as the forest around you. The words struck like a blade, but Alaric steadied himself. Perhaps I do fear that, he admitted. But fear is no excuse for inaction. I will face whatever truth the rose holds, no matter how painful. The reflection faltered, its edges blurring like smoke on the wind. The ground beneath him shifted again, and the clearing reformed, the ancient tree and the rose returning as if they had never left. The owl remained perched above the bloom, its silver eyes gleaming with approval. You have passed the first test, it said, its voice softer now, almost solemn. But the rose will demand more of you still. Alaric stepped closer, the rose's light drawing him in. The air around it shimmered with an otherworldly energy, and he could feel its pull, a thread tightening around his heart. He reached out, his hand trembling as his fingers brushed the edge of a petal. The forest held its breath. As Alaric's fingers grazed the edge of the winter rose, an icy heat surged through him, racing along his veins and pooling in his chest. The world dissolved around him. The frost-laden clearing swallowed by darkness so profound it seemed to seep into his very soul. He stood suspended in a void, weightless yet rooted, as if time and space had folded in on themselves. Then a glimmer pierced the darkness, a single thread of light weaving into a tapestry of visions that unfolded before him. Alaric watched, spellbound, as fragments of a future not yet written unraveled with breathtaking clarity. He stood in a grand hall, its vaulted ceilings dripping with frost. A crown rested on his brow, heavy and cold, its jagged edges cutting into his skin. Before him knelt a host of figures, their faces obscured, their voices a chorus of murmured oaths. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves whispered of betrayal. Alaric felt the weight of their gazes, some reverent, others laced with hidden malice. The scene shifted, and the frostbitten grandeur gave way to a battlefield bathed in firelight. The ground beneath his boots was soaked with blood, and the acrid stench of ash stung his nostrils. Around him, warriors clashed with a ferocity that shook the earth. His own blade gleamed, red with the lifeblood of those who had fallen before it. Yet, through the chaos, his eyes were drawn to a figure at the edge of the fray, a woman cloaked in shadows, her eyes burning like twin embers. Her gaze met his, and in it he saw not enmity, but something far more unsettling: recognition. The vision twisted again, faster this time, as if the threads of fate were fraying. He saw himself standing alone in a vast icy expanse, the wind howling around him. His armor was cracked, his sword shattered at his feet. Before him loomed a great chasm, its depths pulsating with an eerie light. Something called to him from within, an ancient, unyielding force that both beckoned and repelled. He felt the pull in his very bones, the weight of a choice he did not yet understand. The final vision emerged like a flickering flame, fragile yet luminous. He was no longer a knight, but a man stripped of titles, standing on the threshold of a village cloaked in twilight. In his hand, he held a single object, a glowing scarab, its light soft and warm like a heartbeat. Around him, the villagers emerged, their faces filled with hope and relief. Among them stood the shadowed woman, her fiery eyes softened by something unspoken. Alaric felt the stirrings of peace, a sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. And then it was gone. The void shattered, spilling him back into the clearing. Alaric fell to his knees, gasping for air, his chest heaving as though he had run a great distance. The winter rose remained before him, its petals unfurled, glowing faintly as if exhausted by the weight of its revelation. The owl perched above it, silent and watchful. "You have seen," the owl said at last, its voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate within Alaric's mind. "The future is a tapestry woven by choice and circumstance. What you witnessed are threads of what may be, not what must be." Alaric's hands trembled as he gripped the hilt of his sword, grounding himself. The woman, the scarab, what does it mean? The owl's silver eyes glimmered with inscrutable wisdom. "That is for you to discover. The road shows only the path, not the destination. The burden of walking it is yours alone." Alaric's heart was a tempest of emotions, fear, hope, determination. But beneath it all lay a growing clarity. The visions had not answered his questions, but had instead posed new ones. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of purpose. As he rose to his feet, the owl spread its wings, the moonlight catching on its frost-tipped feathers. "Take what you have learned, knight, and carry it with you. The forest will grant you safe passage, but the trials beyond its borders will be yours to face." Alaric nodded, his gaze lingering on the winter rose. Its glow had faded, its petals curling inward as if retreating into slumber. He turned away, the weight of the visions heavy upon him, but his steps were steady, his resolve unshaken. The forest seemed to shift around him, the shadows parting to reveal a path bathed in pale light. Behind him, the owl watched in silence, its silver eyes reflecting not the night's departure, but the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The Frostvile forest released its grip reluctantly, as if reluctant to let its challenger escape. Alaric stepped through the parting shadows, his breath steady in the icy air. But the weight of the visions lingered in his chest like an unspoken oath. The moon hung low in the sky, its light casting long, pale streaks across the snow-covered earth. Though he had returned to the outer edges of the forest, the air still seemed charged with the ancient power he had faced at its heart. The path stretched before him, empty and unmarked, leading back to a world that no longer felt the same. He paused at the forest edge, glancing over his shoulder at the towering trees that loomed like silent sentinels. Somewhere within their depths, the winter rose had sealed itself once more, its secrets entrusted to him alone. The owl's silver eyes flashed briefly in his mind, a reminder of the warning it had given him. The rose's truths were not burdens to be carried lightly. Alaric pressed onward. The snow deepened as he descended the ridge, crunching beneath his boots in a steady rhythm. The stillness of the forest gave way to the faint sounds of life. The distant howl of wind through the mountains, the soft rustle of pine needles stirred by the breeze. Yet, even as the mundane world reasserted itself, Alaric found no comfort in its familiarity. The visions had burned themselves into his mind, vivid and unrelenting. The weight of the crown on his brow, the battlefield drenched in blood and fire, the woman with ember-bright eyes, the scarab glowing in his hand. Each fragment of his future felt both impossibly distant and dangerously near, like shadows that stretched ahead of him, waiting for him to catch up. By nightfall, he reached the edge of a frozen river. Its surface glimmered faintly under the moonlight, reminding him of the mirrored ice where he had confronted his younger self. The memory sent a shiver through him, but this time it was not fear that gripped him. It was determination. He knelt by the riverbank, his breath fogging the air as he leaned his sword against a rock. The blade caught the moonlight, its worn edges reflecting a faint shimmer. He traced a gloved hand over its hilt, feeling the grooves and nicks that told the story of every battle he had fought. The sword had been his companion through war and ruin, a tool of survival and destruction. But now, as he stared at its worn metal, he saw it as something else. A reminder of choices made and the price they carried. The owl's words echoed in his mind. The rose shows only the path, not the destination. The truth of it settled within him like the stillness before a storm. The visions were not a map to his future, but a challenge to shape it. The crown, the battlefield, the shadowed woman, these were possibilities, not certainties. Whatever lay ahead, his actions would carve the way. Alaric rose, his hand steady as he sheathed the blade. The frozen river gleamed before him, stretching toward the horizon, where the faint glow of a village flickered in the distance. He had no name for the place, no knowledge of its people, yet he felt the pull of it, the quiet promise of a new beginning. As he crossed the river, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint warmth that defied the season. It whispered through the trees, a sound almost too soft to hear, yet unmistakable. A voice, familiar and resolute. Alaric. He stopped, turning toward the sound. The forest loomed behind him, its shadows deep and still. For a moment, he thought he saw a pair of silver eyes glinting in the dark. But when he blinked, they were gone. The night smiled faintly, his breath curling in the cold air. Whatever fate awaited him, he would meet it not as a hollow wanderer, but as a man with purpose. The scarab from the vision lingered in his mind, its glow a symbol of hope and transformation. He did not yet know what it meant, but he would find it. He would carve his path with the resolve of one who had faced the darkness and emerged unbroken. As he stepped onto the far bank, the moonlight illuminated his figure, casting his shadow ahead of him. The village lights grew brighter, a beacon in the snowbound night. Alaric tightened his grip on his sword and walked forward, the faint echo of the owl's voice guiding him like a thread through the labyrinth of his fate. And somewhere in the depths of Frostvale Forest, the winter rose stirred, its petals glimmering faintly under the solstice moon, waiting for the next soul brave enough to seek its truth.